Here's what I would love for you to do this morning. I want you to look intently at the person to your right and at the person to your left. Number one, aren't you glad you don't look like them this morning? That's a good thing. Some of you are like, no, that's my wife. We know Captain Romance, okay? But the second and bigger reason why I wanted you to look at the people sitting next to you is that here's the reality for all of us in this room, young or old. The person that you just looked to and at and intently toward has a story. And there's a very high probability that most of us in this room don't know the story of every single person in this room. But if I have a sneaky suspicion, if I could take an educated, maybe an uneducated guess, there are men within the sound of my voice, and the reason why, sir, you see yourself in a good way or a bad way is because of something your father or someone else said to you at some point. I would submit that there are beautiful women within the sound of my voice, which is all of you ladies, by the way. But every single one of you as a woman, when you look in your mirror every single morning, you tell yourself an untruth because of something that was said to you. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in case you care, words create worlds. Words create worlds. And words have created our stories. And isn't it crazy how some of us in this room, the person that you look to, you know their backstory, you know more of their story than somebody else does, and you have a really difficult time when people judge the person who you looked at and they have the story completely wrong? Isn't it interesting how many of us will defend to our death someone who we know their backstory and other people get it wrong? I'll prove it to you. Our family are big Duke University fans. Our son played football there. And this past basketball season, some of you may have seen this. I brought a picture. Syracuse was playing Duke at Duke in basketball, and Syracuse's head coach, Jim Boeheim, you can't see it real well. I brought a close-up. Jim Boeheim appeared to relieve himself in his pants during the middle of the game. He appeared to pee his pants in the middle of the game. And the Duke faithful on social media were going crazy just ripping Jim Boeheim and making fun of him until someone posted this, that Jim Boeheim is a prostate cancer survivor. And one of the byproducts of his surgery was that he has a difficult time controlling his bladder. That changes the story, doesn't it? It makes you look at it a completely different way. In fact, it causes you and I to extend grace when we want to be judgmental. If we're honest with each other, when you know someone's story, their decisions and their life start making a lot more sense to you. If you knew my story and my stuff, I would make much more sense to you. In fact, some of you, this has happened to me this morning on several occasions. Some of you so kind. The hospitality and kindness of this place is unbelievable. But a lot of you have walked up to me today and introduced yourself, and you immediately look at my shoes, which I'm not offended. I'm not bummed out about. But for those of you in the balcony you cannot see, I've got these really bright white basketball shoes on. And so, don't nod your head like that, all right? But a lot of you have looked at me, and you'll look at me, and then you look down at my shoes, and look at me and look down at my shoes, because you're going, okay, business up top, party in the basement, what's going on? Well, here's the reason, and people who know me best know this about me. The reason why I love to wear really good-looking sneakers and basketball shoes and tennis shoes is that our family grew up poor. We weren't poor, we was po, okay? We couldn't even afford the other O and R. And I can remember when I was your age, teenagers, going to school with hand-me-down shoes and being made fun of. And I made up my mind that at some point in my life, when I had enough money to buy shoes, that I would never be in front of people again without some pair of shoes that looked really cool. And then, those of you that are athletes will appreciate this. I played college athletics 50 pounds ago, and my dad, when I was in middle school, told me, don't wear dark cleats or basketball shoes because, boy, they make you look slow. And so from that point on, I have worn nothing but white cleats or white sneakers. If you see me running around the church later, I'm fast. Okay, that's the deal. But watch, you don't have to like why I wear basketball shoes. You don't even have to agree with the fact that I wear basketball shoes, but it helps you understand. When you understand the backstory, you start understanding someone else. But here's the problem for all of us in this room. And this is where, as it begins to get a little bit of tension for those of us especially who are parents, we can only know about others what others are willing to show. I can't know anything about you by just looking at you. There's this old maxim and adage, some of you know it, what you see is what you get. That is completely and 100% true. But I would also propose that what you see is what you're willing to show. And if we are really, really honest, all of us in this room, young and old, and especially moms and dads in the room, here is where we are in our country, in our families, in our homes, and in our churches. We are so uncomfortable with our backstory that we've become incredible surface people. And the reason why is that it's easy to judge someone just based on what you see. But the byproduct of that naturally is you become shallow. And if I may, with all the love and respect in my heart, it's not just the greater Starkville, Mississippi area. It is homes and churches all across our country. We have become incredibly shallow people. Now, in fairness, shallow in small amounts can provide some relief. But shallow all the time leaves you empty. Shallow in some relationships just makes you polite. And especially those in Christendom and in the church, we have perfected the ability to be shallow and polite to others. Did you notice that today? Some of you met someone or were greeted by someone and it's always, hey, you look good, how you doing, go dogs, clinga, whatever y'all do here. It's really, really shallow. It's always on the surface. Shallow in some relationships makes you polite, but shallow in every single relationship makes you lonely. And if I may, moms and dads, some of you have elementary age kids, middle school kids, high school kids, college age kids, young adult age kids, and they feel lonely in your home because it's so shallow. Because nobody knows each other. It's okay to be shallow sometimes. It's not cool to be shallow all the time. And here's what shallow has done. What we want to do, especially those of us that are a little more theologically astute, you're listening to me, and your antidote to the shallowness of our culture is, well, we just need to go deep. I would propose that the opposite of shallow is not deep. The opposite of shallow is personal. It's personal. It's knowing someone beyond the surface. Isn't it interesting how many of us in this room, you have incredibly deep relationships with people sitting around you or people in your family, but it's not that you know the deepest recesses of their heart and soul. It's that you actually know them personally. And why that is so important for all of us in this room, young and old, and especially for the family, is that if you're not careful, shallow will make you professional label makers. Living shallow lives as parents, living shallow lives teenagers, living shallow lives college students, living shallow lives young adults, living shallow lives grandparents will make you a professional label maker. And here's why becoming a label maker in our culture, and especially with our families and churches, is so dangerous. The labels that you and I have received, watch this, from our families are the labels that hurt the most, hit the hardest, and last the longest. The label that you've received from your dad, the label you received from your mom, and there's some teenagers and kids listening to me right now. There are adults listening to me right now. And it's like I just hit a nerve that has been exposed, because this is what you know. You still haven't recovered from what dad said, mom said. Parents, there's some of us in this room, our children are sitting around us, and there's this giant awkward thing going on your row. Because here's what you know. There are things that you've said or haven't said, and they hurt, and they last, and you can't get over them. There's always more to the story than we can't see. And so here's what I'd love to do this morning. I would love to take a look at a story in the book of Luke. If you have your Bible, you can turn here. Book of Luke is where we're going to be, chapter 8. If you didn't bring your Bible, totally cool. We're going to throw it up on the big plasma Bible back behind me. You can read it there on the projector Bible. But I'm going to be reading out of the New Living Translation. And while you're turning there, if you don't do the whole Jesus God Bible thing much, let me tell you why I put a whole lot of weight into what Luke said. For those of you that don't know, we have four people especially in the New Testament who wrote about the life of Jesus. Matthew wrote about the life of Jesus. Mark wrote about the life of Jesus. John wrote about the life of Jesus. And the guy that we look at today is a guy by the name of Luke. Luke was a doctor and a lawyer who actually interviewed people who did life with Jesus. We have more historical evidence, ladies and gentlemen, in case you care, that Jesus Christ lived, died, and rose from the dead than we do about the entire Roman civilization. And part of the reason why we have that is because of the eyewitness accounts and the links that people went to get data and history about what happened. And the bigger part this morning for me, for all of us in this room, the reason why I lean into what Luke said is that he's writing about the person of Jesus. Now, I understand I'm in a college town, and there are so many of you as intellectuals, whether professors or some of you college freshmen, or those of you that are in your 8th year, whatever. But here's what I would ask you to consider. The reason why I put weight into what Luke said about Jesus is because Jesus rose from the dead. Everybody okay? Jesus rose. If you're not impressed by the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, try it. Die and try to come back to life. We'll wait. Right? None of us want to try that, but because we know Jesus did, things that were said about him hold a whole lot more weight. Well, there's this story that Luke records talking to people who were with Jesus when this happens, and this is going to make so much sense as to why people put so much weight into this story. Luke chapter 8, verse 40. Here's what Luke says. On the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. To which, if you're reading this for the first time, the question you and I should ask is, why in the world were people on the other side of the lake waiting for Jesus, and what happened on the other side of the lake that would have them on this side of the lake waiting on him? Well, here's what happened on the other side of the lake and in days and weeks before. The miracle we're about to read about is, I think, the 14th miracle. So 13 other miracles in chronological order had happened before Jesus is about to do what he did. 13 of those miracles. One of those miracles we know is that Jesus raised a widow's son from the dead. He literally looked at a dead boy and said, "Get up," and the kid got up and walked, to which all of us in this room, because we're all scared of death, well, let me rephrase that. Most of us are not scared of being dead, we're scared of getting dead, right? There's a difference. Well, Jesus raises this boy from the dead. And then we know Jesus, in one of those times, he had spoken to the Sea of Galilee that was in the middle of a tsunami and told the storm to calm down, and everything calmed down. And then we also know what had happened immediately on the other side of the lake before we pick up on this, is that there was a man possessed by a demon. Jesus looked at the man possessed by demons, told the demons, "Get out of him." The demons went into pigs, and the pigs ran themselves off into a lake, which I wish I could have been there for that. That would have been awesome. So when the scriptures say Jesus went to the other side of the lake and people waiting on him, yes, they're waiting on him. Teenagers, he's become insta-famous, okay? His TikTok is off the chain. All right, it's going on. They cannot wait to hear and see about this dude named Jesus. He gets to the other side of the lake, and here's what happens. There was a man named Jairus, who was a leader in the synagogue. And for those of you that don't know, Jesus and leaders of synagogues did not get along well. Leaders of synagogues did not believe he was the Son of God. They thought he was a heretic. They thought he was a magician and a wizard. So there's a leader by the name of Jairus. He's a leader of the synagogue. And look what Jairus does. Jairus comes and falls at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. Now, moms and dads in the room, why in the world would a man who doesn't even believe that Jesus is who everybody else says he is go and fall at the feet of Jesus and plead with him to come home with him? Well, I can tell you why. Luke tells us why. Because Jairus has a 12-year-old daughter. In fact, Luke says it. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. Parents, isn't it crazy how desperate you get when it's about your kids? Jairus wants Jesus to go home with him. And so Jairus, or Jesus, the scriptures tell us, Luke tells us, decides to go home with him. And as Jesus was with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. And this gets interesting, especially if you're female. Listen closely to this. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. So coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe, and immediately the bleeding stopped. Now, let me address all the ladies in the room, and men, you can listen in. Ladies, this is more than just a woman having reached a time where she had her menstrual cycle and she's bleeding once a month. I'm not trying to be crude or crass, but it's part of life. This is more than that. This woman literally for 12 years straight, ladies, was bleeding every single day for 12 years straight. Not only that, but we know, Luke gives us this detail, she had tried to find a cure, which means she's probably exhausted her financial ability trying to find a cure of why is this happening. It also means two things practically for every woman in the room. You understand this, and men, we also understand this as well. Ladies, for 12 years, every single day of 12 years, this woman has been in pain. You understand that, we as men don't. Men, we also understand this, though, that secondly, for 12 years, every single day, this woman has been in a bad mood, okay? She's been in an incredibly bad mood. And notice what she does. How she interacts with Jesus tells you how people thought about her. Because the scriptures don't tell us that she walked up to Jesus and says, bro, I'm desperate, I need help. Did you notice that the scriptures say that this woman comes up from behind Jesus and touches the fringe of his robe, barely gets a touch of his clothing? Why? Because Jewish law, the Levitical law, said this. In fact, I think we brought this, Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25, that when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be considered unclean as long as that keeps going. So watch, this is where it gets really, really personal. This woman had been labeled unclean for most of her adult life. By unclean, that meant this, that if you saw her in public, you were to point at her and yell, unclean. If she touched you, you're unclean. If you touch her, you're unclean. She couldn't have any interaction with other people. All because of her issue. Now watch. I'm of the opinion, because she had been labeled as unclean for 12 years, that she probably hid herself so that no one could see her. Jesus walks by, everybody's attention goes with Jesus. She probably has her head covered so she can't be recognized, but now's her chance, because she thinks because he's raised a widow from the dead, he's calmed the sea, he's cast demons into pigs and they've drowned themselves, maybe this man can help me. And he comes up from behind her, but coming up from behind her means this, that she outs herself. And she touches the fringe of his robe, and now she's out in the middle of the open, and people start seeing her, and this, if you were there, is what you would have heard. Unclean! It's the lady with the blood issue. Gross. That's just nasty. Get away from us. Isn't it interesting how culture loves to label us by our issues? Isn't it crazy? And I don't know anybody in this room, but isn't it crazy how many of you walked in this room this morning and you would have sworn that people are staring at you because somebody knows your issue? Now, nobody does. but you would swear. And by your issue, I mean things like this, something you've done that you feel really guilty about, that other people know about or other people don't know about. In fact, other people don't know what you've done, but you think everybody knows what you've done, so you walk around with this constant thing of everybody staring at me because of what you've done. Maybe it's not what you've done, maybe it was what was done to you. If I may, in a room this size, there's a very high probability with as many people in this room, there's some woman or man in this room, and you've been abused in some way, shape, or form, whether it's been physically, emotionally, perhaps sexually. There may be a rape survivor sitting here among us, and nobody knows. And you think that everybody sees you by your issue. For some of you, it's your appearance. You're just so insecure about the way that you look. For others of us, it's your family. For some of us, it's a mistake that you made. I told my wife to embrace her mistakes, and she hugged me. That was not cool, okay, but for some of us, it's who you dated, or you're dating, or who you were married to, or who you married. And isn't it crazy what those issues and those labels, how they have limited you because they've created limits? For those of us in this room who've been paralyzed by the labels that we've received, maybe it's from what our dad said or mom said, our dad says, our mom says, or that thing that you did or didn't do that you didn't deserve, or the way that you look, or your family, or a mistake that you made, or who it is that you're with, how it's caused you to quit trying, or to quit reaching, or to quit welcoming, or quit accepting, or quit risking. Psst, can I tell you what we've become? Watch. You're shallow. It's why there are dads in this room, and the greatest need of your son and daughter's heart is for you to be the real you and be the loving, caring person that you really are, but you can't get past what and how you've been labeled. Your issue. It's a mom in this room that's been wounded by words that are not true, but you think they are. This woman was limited. This woman's labels had limited who she was and what she could do. And I find it interesting how Jesus responded to her. And if I may, perhaps there's a clue in how we should respond to others. Because here's what Jesus does, and this is interesting. Luke tells us this. It's the first thing that Jesus says after this woman touches the fringe of his robe. Now understand, there is a large crowd pressing around him. This woman, in my mind's eye, has dove on the ground to touch the fringe of his robe. She's immediately healed. There's a ton of theological weight in that we don't have time to get into. But Jesus immediately stops and he goes, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And the disciples' response to him is actually kind of comical because there's a crowd around him. And so everyone, Luke says, everyone is denying it. And Peter, Captain Peter, I stick my foot in my mouth all the time, goes, "Bro, everybody's touching you. There's a crowd. Chill out. You're the Lord, okay? Everybody's touching you." And then Jesus says, and this is probably one of the reasons if you don't do the whole Jesus God church thing much and you're kind of stiff-arming Christianity and walking with Jesus, this may be one of the reasons why, because the next thing Jesus says is really kind of spooky and mystical and hocus pocus, because Jesus said, "No, someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me." That's like a correction, I know your father kind of moment. Jesus feels his power leave him. And now Jesus has stopped and said, "Somebody touched me." And over here, this woman is laying in the ground and she's being screamed at. "Unclean, unclean, unclean." And Luke says that when the woman realized that she couldn't stay hidden, she began to tremble and she fell to her knees in front of him. And you know what happens next, right? The crowd is screaming, "You can't touch him. You don't need to be here." But she tries to give an explanation of what's happened and how long she's been bleeding and how this issue has crippled her and that she felt like he was the only hope. And she touched the hem of his garment, and now she's been healed. And do you see how Jesus responds to her? Jesus looked at her, everybody looked, and said, I don't care what you say. I'm the Lord. Keep your filthy hands off me. Nope. Some of you are like, that's not in my Bible. Jesus looked at her and said, circle, circle, dot, dot, now you got your cootie shot. Deuces. That's what he said. No. Wow. Jesus looks at her and he says, daughter. Daughter. Not woman with an issue. Not unclean. He goes, daughter. Men, if it had been a male thing, he would have said, son. For all of us, my child, my kid. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You're okay. Did you hear it? Did it bother you a little bit this morning? Daughter? Son? Sir, ma'am, teenagers, college students. When the creator of the universe looks at you, he doesn't see your issue. He sees his kid. And I think this speaks to every parent in this room. Mom and dad, this may cause some tension, but maybe we point out what's wrong with our kids so much that we've forgotten that they've been created in the image of God. Maybe, mom and dad, there's a reason why you have such a difficult time thinking that they've been made in the image of God, because you become a master at pointing out all their issues. And if I may, hear me out. Mom and dad, don't expect your son or daughter to follow Jesus until you start treating them like they've been made in the image of God. And I know, I can tell, some of you are like, bro, the issue she has is so extreme, it doesn't even come close to anything we're dealing with in our family in 2019 in Starkville, Mississippi, in the state of Mississippi, in United States of America. You're right. That is an extreme thing. That may probably is not the issue or the label you've received. But you've gotten these. There's a young man, there's an old man that's heard his father call him a loser, a failure, a freak, a geek. Somebody came in here today and you think that all they think about you, sir, is you're a womanizer, you're an adulterer, or you're an addict, or all you do is party. You're a drunk. Maybe there's that man or woman here and you were an unbelievable athlete in high school and that's all you see yourself now in your 40s and 50s. You are a walking, talking Uncle Rico. You're just a jock and you haven't grown out of it because you can't see yourself as anything but that. Or you're fat, or you're skinny, or you're ugly. There's some of you as ladies in this room, you've been called pretty all your life to such an extent that you can't see yourself as anything more than that. You're useless, annoying, you're boring. Right, teenagers? You're extra, or you're just basic, or you're slim thick. I don't have time, but they can help you understand what I'm talking about. Or you're rich. I'm not sure there's any label or issue that makes you more poverty-stricken than just being rich. or you're just poor, or you're divorced, or you're separated, or you're absent, or you're black, or you're Latino, or you're Asian, or you're white. And here's a heads up, ladies and gentlemen. God has a favorite race. It's the human race. Everybody okay? Some of y'all are nervous. Or she's lesbian, or gay, or bisexual, or transsexual, or pansexual. Or you're just a Republican, or you're just a Democrat. And I find it funny that I put that before smart and dumb. Or you're just old, or you're a prude, or you're worthless, or you've been called entitled, or you're rebellious or insecure, rude, lame, punk, fatherless. Isn't it crazy how the label you've received made it personal? And to everybody in the room, you know what the creator of the universe says to you? The same thing he said to her. He says, daughter, son, child of God, psst, mine. And what would our homes be like if that's the posture we took with our own children? And if you don't think that what I'm talking about is really that big of a deal, I'll leave you with this. When our youngest daughter, who's now a freshman in college, was third grade, our oldest child, our son, I remember was a junior. He played on a really good high school football team. They played on ESPN one Friday night. I remember that because my youngest brother brought his daughters to come and watch him play for the first time. And at the end of that game, my wife took a picture of our kids and my nieces at the game. And the next day, she showed me this picture. She said, Stuart, did you see the picture that I took after the game? And tall girl in the back there on this side is our oldest daughter, our son in the middle, our youngest daughter on this side. These three little girls are my nieces. And I'm looking at the picture. I'm like, yeah, this is a great picture. But who's the little black girl in the picture? And our youngest daughter goes, Dad, that's my best friend Casey, and just, runs off. Well, I hadn't had a chance to meet Casey yet. Cameron was just starting in a new school, but I began to get bits and pieces about the story about how Cameron and Casey met each other. First time they met was on a field trip where they were about to get on the bus to go on a field trip, and Casey, who's an African-American girl, and my daughter, Casey's in front of my daughter, Casey's behind, or Cameron, our daughter's behind Casey. Casey takes a step up to get on the bus, and if you're a woman of color, you know this, it's not a cool thing to touch a woman of color's hair. Well, my daughter, wouldn't you know, reaches up and touches Casey's hair. But as she's touching her hair, our daughter goes, "Your hair is so pretty." Well, Casey turns around and goes, "Thank you. You want to be my friend? Don't you wish friendship was like that again?" And they wind up sitting beside each other the entire field trip on the bus, hanging out with each other the entire field trip. Well, we also realized that my wife Kelly and Casey's mom were chaperones on that field trip. And as fate would have it, they went that day to this restaurant. Some of you may have been to this restaurant in Atlanta called The Varsity. If you get a chance to go to The Varsity to eat, I would highly recommend don't. But that's a whole nother thing, okay? It'll set you free, you know what I mean? Anyway. But my wife Kelly and Casey's mom wind up sitting at the same booth. They become really good friends. And so over the course of several months, this is what we saw happen. Cameron, our daughter, would invite Casey over. Casey, you want to come over? Casey, you want to go out to eat with us? Casey, you want to go to the movies? Casey, you want to go on vacation with us? And Casey's mom would always respectfully say, and I appreciate this, stranger danger, she would say no. And we thought it was something with us, and is it the color barrier or whatever? But eventually we found out why there was a hesitancy. We also began to notice that we never saw a husband or a dad in the picture. And that was strange until we found out that Casey's father was a bodyguard for a very famous rapper. If I were to tell you who the rapper is, you would know. And Casey's dad was gunned down outside of a club in Atlanta and murdered. Eventually, Casey's mom let Casey come to our house. And now we can't keep Casey out of our house. She's become like our third daughter. This is a picture from a couple of spring breaks ago. And this is a picture from this past spring when Casey and our daughter graduated from high school. She's like my daughter. And just before the back end of her senior year in high school, Casey called me one day and said, Mr. Stewart, I'm starting to write essays to apply for scholarships at colleges, and would you help me write my essay? And I'm like, absolutely, happy to help. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. And then I asked her this question. I said, Casey, what are you going to write about? And she said, I want to write about my dad. Now, you need to understand, Kelly has had some conversation with Casey about her dad. Casey has never talked to me about her dad. In fact, if you try to talk to Casey about her dad, she will shut down. She sends me this essay after she's done, and I only made a few changes. But I brought a portion of it to read to you for one reason only. I want you to hear what labels can do. With one pull of a trigger, my mother became a single parent. She bore the weight of solely providing for and raising 2 children. She struggled with the responsibility of simply paying household bills. It was and is still extremely hard for her. Perhaps the most difficult part of my father's death has been that I've had to rely solely on what my family tells me as it relates to memories of my father. Someone has wisely quipped that childhood is like being drunk. Everyone remembers what you did except you. And unlike my older brother and sister, I don't remember much about my father. They have had a chance to make memories, to know my dad. They had cool stories they'd love to tell, but they've passed down to me. But I only have one memory of my own, and it's a memory that I really wish I could forget. I remember being at his funeral and placing my 2 favorite dolls into his casket. That memory doesn't help me know my dad. That memory haunts me. Growing older hasn't made dealing with this personal void any easier. It seems at every turn I'm reminded I'm fatherless. In the 3rd grade, our class was asked to write about one wish we each had, of course. I wrote that my one wish is that my dad would come back to life. Reading that 3rd grade wish today brings a wave of emotion that I can't hold back. I weep thinking of 9-year-old Casey saying, I'll never go to a father-daughter dance because to this day it's still true. People who claim it will get easier lie. It doesn't get easier. On the contrary, it seems to grow heavier, to become harder, to feel more painful. My loss defines my life on a day-to-day basis. With everything I do, and this is the part I really want you to listen to. With everything I do, I try to be the best at it so that at the very least it seems like I have it all together and I'm not completely lost. I throw myself into my schoolwork so that when people see my grades, they see the opposite of the statistic they expect. Most people expect a young black woman in my situation because they're angry, because they're hurting, because they don't know how to cope with their feelings, because they're fatherless, to go down the wrong path, to make irreversible choices. My loss, regardless of how deep, despite the void that cannot be filled, will not destroy me. Yes, it has defined me, but I will not be a statistic. And then she says this in closing. My mother always says that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest people. My faith in God has given me the strength to trust in my mom's words of comfort, but I would be less than honest if I didn't admit that I never asked to be this strong. And you know what? Creator God, Jesus, lover of all of our souls, says to Casey today the same thing he says to you, regardless of what your issue is. You're not fatherless. You're my daughter. You're my son. You're my kid. And moms and dads, it's the greatest need of your own children too. Jesus, here's what I ask for all of us today. This is so much easier for us to listen to and think about than it is for us to apply. I pray, Spirit of God, that you would give a mom, a dad, a grandparent, a husband, a wife, maybe even a teenager, college student, young adult. Would you give them the courage this morning to simply face what they know is true? And would you help them begin this arduous journey back to believing what you say about us? What you say about us is true. You call us sons and daughters.